I used to believe that love, especially from parents, was unconditional. That no matter what choices you made, no matter how far you strayed from expectations, there would always be a place you could return to, a door that would never fully close. I was wrong. Growing up, my parents weren't cruel. They provided, they protected, and in their own structured way, they cared. But their love had invisible strings attached, strings I didn't notice as a child because I had never tried to pull away from them. Everything in our home followed a script. Success meant stability. Stability meant obedience, and obedience meant love. I was a good child for most of my life. I followed instructions, got decent grades, and never questioned their authority. Not because I agreed with everything, but because it felt easier than conflict, easier than disappointing them. But somewhere along the way, I started to realize something unsettling. The life they had planned for me didn't feel like mine. It felt borrowed, temporary, like I was living inside someone else's expectations, slowly losing pieces of myself just to keep the peace. At first, I ignored it. I told myself this is what adulthood looks like: sacrifice, responsibility. Doing what's right, not what feels right. But the feeling didn't go away. It grew louder, stronger. Until one day, I couldn't ignore it anymore. I still remember the night everything changed. We were sitting at the dinner table, my father at the head, my mother quietly serving food, the same routine we had followed for years. It should have felt normal, but my heart was racing, because I had made a decision, and for the first time in my life, I was about to say it out loud. I'm not going to follow that career path, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The room went silent. My father didn't react immediately. He just looked at me, slowly putting down his fork as if giving my words time to correct themselves. "What did you say?" he asked. "I've decided to do something else," I continued, forcing myself not to shrink under his gaze. "Something I actually want." That's when I saw it, the shift, disappointment turning into something sharper. "Something colder? Do you even understand what you're saying?" he asked, his voice low but firm. "I do," I said. "You're throwing away your future." "No," I replied quietly, "I'm choosing it." That was the moment everything broke. My father stood up abruptly, the sound of his chair scraping against the floor, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Choosing," he repeated, almost laughing, but there was no humor in it. "You think you know better than us, after everything we've done for you." My mother didn't say anything. She just stood there, her hands frozen around the serving spoon, her eyes avoiding mine. That silence hurt more than his anger. "I'm not saying you're wrong. I tried again. I'm just saying it's not right for me. It doesn't have to be right for you," my father snapped. "It's what's best for you." "No," I said, this time louder. "It's what you want." The words hung in the air like a challenge. And I realized too late that there was no going back from them. For a moment, everything went completely still. Then came the ultimatum. "You will follow the path we've chosen," he said, his voice now calm in a way that felt far more dangerous than shouting. "Or you can leave." I stared at him, waiting for something. A crack in his expression, a sign that he didn't mean it. There was nothing. I turned to my mother, hoping she would step in, hoping she would soften this, fix this, stop this from turning into something irreversible. But she didn't. She just looked at me, and then looked away. That was my answer. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to breathe. "Then I'll leave," I said. Even as I said it, part of me expected them to stop me, to realize what they were about to lose. To choose me over their pride, but they didn't, not a single word, not a single step toward me. So I stood up, walked to my room, and packed a bag with shaking hands. Every item I folded felt unreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart instead of my own. When I came back to the living room, they were exactly where I had left them, unmoved, unchanged, as if I had already disappeared. I paused at the door, my heart screaming for me to turn around, to apologize, to undo everything. But something deeper, something stronger, kept me moving forward. "I hope one day you understand," I said quietly. No one answered, so I opened the door and stepped out into a world that suddenly felt too big, too cold, and completely unfamiliar. Behind me, the door closed, and with it, the life I had always known. That was the night I learned something I would never forget. Sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you the most are the first to let you go. The first night alone felt unreal. Not freeing, not exciting, just empty. I sat on the edge of a thin mattress in a small rented room that smelled faintly of damp walls and old paint. The silence was louder than anything I had ever experienced. No familiar sounds, no voices, no sense of belonging. Just me and the weight of what I had done. For the first time, doubt crept in without resistance. What if they were right? What if I had just destroyed my future for nothing? The thoughts didn't come all at once, they lingered, whispering in the quiet corners of my mind, growing louder with every passing hour. But morning didn't wait for answers. Reality hit quickly. Rent had to be paid. Food had to be bought. Survival didn't care about emotions, so I started working. Not the kind of work my parents would have approved of. Not the kind they could proudly talk about in front of relatives. Just whatever I could find. Long hours. Low pay. Exhaustion that seeped into my bones. Some days I worked so much I barely had time to think. Other days, the exhaustion forced me to sit still, and that's when everything came rushing back. The loneliness, the silence, the absence of a safety net. There were nights I skipped meals just to make sure I had enough for rent. Nights I stared at my phone, tempted to call home just to hear a familiar voice, but I never did, because deep down I knew what I would hear. "Are you ready to come back and do things our way?" And I wasn't, so I stayed silent. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and somewhere in that struggle, something unexpected began to happen. I started changing. Not in a dramatic, overnight way, but slowly, quietly. I learned how to rely on myself, how to solve problems without waiting for guidance, how to make decisions without seeking approval, how to stand alone without feeling like I was falling apart. It wasn't easy. There were failures, plenty of them, opportunities that didn't work out, mistakes that cost me time, money, and confidence, moments where I questioned everything all over again. But this time, I didn't run from it. I adapted. I learned. I kept going, and little by little, things started to shift. The same world that had once felt cold and unforgiving began to open small doors. A better job, a slightly bigger space, a sense of control over my own life. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. For the first time, I wasn't living to meet someone else's expectations. I was building something that reflected who I actually was, and that made all the difference. Years passed before I even realized how far I had come. The struggle didn't disappear, but it became manageable. Familiar, something I knew how to handle instead of something that overwhelmed me. I had stability. Not luxury, not excess, just enough. Enough to breathe without fear. Enough to sleep without anxiety clawing at my chest. Enough to feel, for the first time, a quiet kind of pride. And then, just when life started to feel steady, they came back. It happened without warning, a message, simple, casual, as if nothing had happened. "We've been thinking about you." I stared at the screen for a long time, my heart racing in a way I hadn't felt in years. All the memories I had tried to bury came rushing back. The door closing, the silence, the pain, and yet beneath all of that, something else surfaced. Hope. The kind you don't want to feel, but can't fully suppress. Maybe they missed me. Maybe they regretted what they did. Maybe this was a second chance. I told myself to be careful, to remember everything. But the truth is, a part of me still wanted what I had lost. So I replied, slowly at first, short messages, safe conversations. They were different, softer, kinder. Gone was the harsh tone, the rigid expectations. In its place was something that felt almost warm. We just want to see you. We've always cared. We were worried. Each word chipped away at the walls I had built around myself. And before I fully realized it, I let them back in. The first time we met again, it felt surreal. Familiar faces, familiar voices, but everything slightly different, like returning to a place that looked the same, but felt completely changed. My mother hugged me tightly, longer than she ever had before. My father spoke gently, carefully choosing his words. For a moment it felt like the past had been erased, like we had somehow found our way back to each other. And I wanted to believe it. I wanted to believe that people could change, that time could heal everything, that maybe losing me had made them realize my worth. So I gave them another chance, not because they deserved it, but because I needed to know if things could be different. What I didn't realize then was that some patterns don't disappear. They just wait, and I had just opened the door for them again. At first, it felt like something fragile was being rebuilt. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to make me believe that maybe, just maybe, we had all changed. Our conversations were careful, like walking across thin ice. No one brought up the past. No one mentioned the night I left. It was as if we had silently agreed to pretend it never happened. And for a while, that illusion worked. We had dinners together again, short visits that slowly turned into longer ones. My mother would ask about my life with a softness I didn't remember from before. My father listened more than he spoke, which felt like progress in itself. It wasn't the family I once knew, but it felt close enough, or at least that's what I told myself. The first crack appeared so subtly, I almost ignored it. A small comment, "You're doing well, but imagine where you'd be if you had listened to us." It was said casually, almost like a joke. My father smiled when he said it, as if expecting me to laugh along. I did, but something inside me tightened. Then came another, "You work too much. That's not a stable way to live." And another, "Are you sure this is sustainable?" Each comment on its own was harmless. Together they felt familiar, too familiar. At first I brushed it off. Old habits, I told myself. Change takes time. They didn't mean anything by it, but deep down a quiet unease began to grow, because I had heard this tone before. The same concern that wasn't really concern. The same advice that wasn't really advice. It didn't take long before the pattern became undeniable. The questions turned into suggestions, the suggestions turned into expectations, and the expectations turned into pressure. "You should think about making a more serious decision. This path isn't secure. We're just trying to guide me." The word made something in my chest twist. I had spent years learning how to stand on my own, how to trust my choices, how to build something without their approval. And now, slowly, they were trying to pull me back into the same place I had fought so hard to escape. But this time I wasn't the same person. I didn't argue right away. I didn't react emotionally. I watched. I listened. I waited. And what I saw confirmed everything I had started to fear. They hadn't changed. They had just learned how to approach me differently. The breaking point came on a quiet afternoon. We were sitting together, the atmosphere tense but unspoken, when my father finally said what had been building beneath every conversation. "This isn't working." I looked at him, calm on the outside but fully aware of what was coming. "What isn't?" I asked. "This life you've chosen," he replied, "it's unstable. It's not what we raised you for." There it was. Not a concern, a judgment. "I'm doing fine," I said evenly for now. He countered, "But what about the future? What about security, respect?" I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not pain. "Clarity, I have security," I said. "I built it myself." My mother sighed softly, shaking her head. "You're still being stubborn." Stubborn, the same word they had used years ago. The same label they had placed on me when I chose myself over their expectations. Except this time it didn't hurt. It just confirmed everything. "I'm not being stubborn," I said quietly. "I'm being honest about what I want, and what you want is wrong." My father snapped, the calm mask finally slipping. "You're making the same mistake all over again." I almost smiled, because in that moment I realized something powerful. To them, I had never changed, and they never intended to change either. This wasn't reconciliation. It was a second attempt to control me. "We let you come back into this family," he continued, his voice rising. "The least you can do is respect our guidance. Let me come back." The words echoed in my mind, as if my place in their lives had always been conditional. As if I was something they could accept or reject based on how well I followed their rules. And suddenly, everything became clear. This wasn't about love, it never had been. It was about control. I stood up slowly, my heart steady in a way it had never been before. "I didn't come back to be controlled," I said. "Then why did you come back?" my mother asked, her voice sharper now. I paused for a moment. The truth sat heavy on my tongue, because I thought you had changed. Silence filled the room. "But it didn't last long. If this is who you're going to be," my father said, his voice cold again, "then maybe this family isn't for you." There it was. The second disowning, delivered almost the same way as the first, but this time it didn't break me. I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I didn't feel that desperate need to hold on to something that was already gone. Instead, I nodded, calm, certain, unshaken. "You're right," I said. Their expressions shifted confusion, maybe even a hint of surprise. They weren't expecting that. They were expecting resistance, emotion, weakness, but I had none left to give. Because this time, I understood something I hadn't understood before. Losing them wasn't the painful part. Believing they could love me differently was, and I wasn't going to make that mistake again. So I turned and walked away. For the second time, but this time I didn't feel lost, I felt free. The second time I walked away, something felt different. The first time, I had stepped into the world carrying pain, doubt, and a desperate hope that maybe I had made the wrong choice. This time there was no doubt, no hesitation, no invisible thread pulling me back, just silence and peace. For the first few days, I expected the emotions to hit me the way they had before. I thought the loneliness would return, that familiar ache in my chest, the urge to reach out, to fix things, to make it right. But it never came. Instead, there was clarity, a quiet, steady understanding that I had finally stopped chasing something that was never truly mine to begin with. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their acceptance. And most importantly, I didn't need their version of love. Life didn't magically become perfect after that. There were still responsibilities, challenges, and moments of exhaustion. But everything felt lighter, like I was no longer carrying a weight I had gotten so used to. I forgot it wasn't supposed to be there. I focused on my work again, but this time it wasn't about proving anything, not to them, not to anyone. It was about building something I believed in, something that reflected me, and without the constant pressure of their expectations, I grew faster than I ever had before. Opportunities expanded, connections strengthened, confidence deepened, not the fragile kind that depends on validation, but the quiet kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are. Months passed, then more, and slowly my life transformed into something I once thought was impossible. Stable, independent, whole. That's when they reached out again. Of course they did. The message came like the others, simple, almost casual. "We want to talk." I stared at the screen, but this time my heart didn't race. There was no emotional storm. No inner conflict, just calm, because I already knew what this was. It wasn't regret, it wasn't growth. It was recognition. They could see from a distance that I had built something without them, and now they wanted back in. But this time I wasn't the same person who had answered them before. I didn't respond immediately. Not out of anger, but because I didn't feel the urgency anymore. Days later, I agreed to meet, not for closure, not for reconciliation, but because I wanted to face them one last time without the version of me they used to control. When I walked into the room, everything felt familiar, and yet completely different. They were the same posture, same expressions, same quiet authority in the way they carried themselves, but I wasn't. And they could feel it. My mother spoke first. "We've missed you." Her voice was soft, carefully chosen. I nodded politely, but said nothing. My father cleared his throat, as if preparing to reclaim control of the conversation. "We may have been too harsh," he admitted, the words sounding unfamiliar in his mouth. It almost sounded like an apology. Almost, but not quite. I listened, calm, detached, present. For the first time in my life, I wasn't reacting to them. I was observing them. "We just want things to go back to normal." My mother added gently, "Normal." I almost smiled. Because now I understood what that word really meant. It meant control, expectation, conditions disguised as love. And I had already outgrown that version of normal. There is no normal to go back to, I said quietly. They exchanged a glance, surprised not by my words, but by the calmness behind them. "You're still our child," my father said, his tone firm again, as if trying to re-establish something that no longer existed. I looked at him for a long moment, and in that moment I felt no anger, no resentment, just acceptance. Acceptance of who they were, and who they would never be. Then I smiled, not bitterly, not sarcastically, but peacefully. "No," I said, "I'm someone you had a chance to keep twice." The silence that followed was heavier than anything they had ever said to me. Because this time they felt it. The finality, the shift, the loss of control. For the first time, they didn't know how to respond. And for the first time, I didn't need them to. I stood up slowly, not in anger, not in defiance, but with quiet certainty. "I wish you well," I added. And I meant it. Not because they deserved it, but because I was finally free of the need to hold on to anything they had done. That was my closure. That was my peace. As I walked away, I didn't look back, not because I was trying to be strong, but because there was nothing left to see. The revenge I once thought I needed, anger, success, proving them wrong, none of it mattered anymore. Because the real revenge was becoming someone they could never control again. Someone who didn't need their approval to feel whole. Someone who chose themselves completely, unapologetically, and without fear. And this time, it wasn't about leaving. It was about never going back.